final review of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. It's been a long time, but now we finally get to the closing ceremonies, as it were, for Metal Gear Rising. 16 boss fights and just as many Let's Play episodes. This thing was chock full of content from start to finish and even beyond that. So how'd it do as a game? Well, it started innocently enough, with Ryan escorting an assumingly South African politician through the revitalized city after his PMC's efforts to increase their security. It then starts going horribly wrong when out of nowhere, agents from another PMC, Desperado, show up to take the politician for their client, upon which Ryan has to run in and chop his way through enemy after enemy just to catch up to the kidnappers. When he finally does, the agents decide to just kill the politician instead of keeping him captive because, well, just why not? Ryan is then left facing with Jetstream Sam, the person who first attacked the politician's caravan, and after a crushing defeat, Sam escapes on the helicopter that picked up Sundowner. After that, he's sent on another mission to Russia to track down a known terrorist, Zoldeyev, who's wanted for crimes against humanity and is being protected by Desperado for whoever their client is, but the game isn't concerned with the logical details of who's actually behind giving these contracts to either Maverick or Desperado, so that's all up in the air for some reason, because when did a story ever need logic before? So after another batch of Desperado ass-kicking, Ryan meets an LQ-84 robot named Blade Wolf that fails at stopping Ryan, but is instead validated that freedom is a dream that he could have had if not beaten down, but since his body's exploded, that's just too bad, little doggy. Raiden beats his way to the oil refinery where Zoldeyev and his guarding Desperado agent is, and after battling her, she's frozen and chopped into bits, and a little later Zoldeyev does this.
You quit Russia money to make Russia money. It is no plan for outside. It is their prison. But now, they will be free!
Why does he destroy a Russian oil field? No one knows, and the story doesn't care. The next mission that Ryan sent to leads him to rural Mexico with a robotic wolf in the backseat of his car. Because out of that burning pile of ash, Doctor was somehow able to recombobulate Blade Wolf's programming, and with Blade Wolf comes Ryan wearing one of the stupidest disguises on the fucking planet in order to sneak into a sewer grate that was 20 feet away from where he parked, upon which he ditches the disguise. This entire segment was stupid and pointless. Couldn't have even put in a short sneaking mission down a street to the sewer grate, eh? I guess not. Developing a logical story costs money and such. Now after that brain-scouring moment, we get to this game's sewer section, where Ryan has to beat his way through another round of Desperado agents and sneak his way into a research lab where Maverick's client thinks is dumping illegal waste into the water system, and once again we aren't told who their client is, so we have no reason to even do this other than our codec friends telling us to. Inside the sewers, we are met with another character named George, who for some reason talks in completely broken English, and he doesn't speak Spanish because he comes from Latin America.
My name George, like Georgetown.
He reveals that the research lab they're investigating has been conducting child organ harvesting, and Ryan needs to go in there and put a stop to it entirely because generic hero motivation. Yeah, there's no reason for Ryan to do this other than it's the right thing to do, risking life and limb for a bunch of brains. Once inside, Ryan finds out that Desperado has been contracted out to World Marshal, one of the biggest PMCs in the world, and that's who's actually conducting the harvesting procedures. Ryan does manage to save the children in the lab after all, and takes George back to Maverick to get checked out medically. The next mission we are treated to, Ryan leaving Maverick in order to go out on his own to stop World Marshal at their HQ building in Denver. He's stopped by the police violently, which has been entirely contracted out to World Marshal, and then within 5 minutes, the police evacuate the entire city of Denver because a cyborg showed up. And because of laws, the police are allowed to use lethal force against a cyborg for the sole action of showing up to town. Yeah, just ignore how he went from driving peacefully to high-speed car chase to being executed. It's not important. Focus on yet another series of beat-em-ups before Ryan meets Jetstream Sam again and actually has an emotional moment, showing Ryan that because of the nanomachines the combatants have in them, repressing their fears stem from most of the fighters having no options other than taking this job, and that inside they're afraid for their families or for themselves going into a job they weren't told about correctly. This entire speech starts affecting Ryan after the repressed feelings are revealed to him and most of the player's controls are sapped from them, providing a connection between player and player character that few games have managed to do so incredibly well. He has to lumber his way to World Marshal HQ without being able to attack, holding his head with obvious pain and at an incredibly slow pace. But eventually we make it to the HQ building where we're introduced to Monsoon, another wind of destruction who gives a finalization of Jetstream's speech by essentially calling it nature's way, survival of the fittest, and whatnot. Afterwards, Ryan convinces himself of a secret, ruthless agenda he had and tells Doctor to turn off his pain inhibitors and transforms himself into Jack the Ripper and brutally murders several soldiers. After a following brutal and unfair battle, Ryan enters World Marshal HQ and fights his way through an office building filled entirely with combat robots and cyborgs. Okay, we are in an office building, right? Why is World Marshal destroying their own building? I'm not even kidding. Halfway through this mission, World Marshal is literally throwing tens of those bird drones at the sides of the building in an attempt to destroy Ryan, and that entire part of the building collapsed filled with debris. It's a fast-paced section I liked, I'll give it that, and underlines the point that World Marshal has so much money that they do not give a shit about what happens to its property. After a freight elevator series of fights that are way too difficult for what they needed to be because the player doesn't know how to parry yet, we get to the brain training room where they're taught to be military cyborgs, and for some reason we are treated to a boss rush of Monsoon and Mistral before getting to Sundowner, because the player should have just assumed that the brain training room was next door to an invisible combat robot manufacturing complex where these two must have come from. Oh, and never mind that they had specific battle styles and abilities, robot technology can just copy their entire brain network so perfectly that they are carbon copies of the people that they're based off of. Yeah, try selling me that idea one more time. I dare you. Once inside, Sundowner tells more of his pro-war shtick, since it's a great way for him to make money, and that it's just another market that needs a supply for their demand. The war economy is great, and he just wants everybody to agree with him. Along with that, he also says that even if Ryan saves all of these brains, World Marshal has facilities like this all over the world, showing that it doesn't matter if he succeeds here or not. After that, Sundowner leads him up to the roof where they can battle, and instead of Sundowner using his scissors sword that we saw him use in the first mission, instead he pulls out an exploding shield out of his ass as his main weapon, and his scissors sword is actually his secondary weapon at best. Game mechanics are a bit off with this fight, but the second phase really makes up for it, along with the finisher, since this guy was a huge pain in the ass, and it makes it cathartic that one of the worst areas in the game was able to end on a high-note boss battle. After that fight, Doctor came down with his helicopter and picked up all the brains in Ryan before being assailed by attack jet drones, where Ryan tries to kill both of them before they get Doctor's helicopter. His sword somehow acts like a USB device and connects Ryan to the attack jet drone, allowing him to use it to kill the other one and then jump off of it back onto the helicopter. Unfortunately, the bar he grabs is torn from the helicopter and he plummets back into Denver, with one of the most believable lines in the game being the scream that he yells when he's falling. This section of the game is short and probably pointless. However, I will give that the cutscene starting it makes Doctor out as an actually funny guy, giving some rare character and class to a codec character, but essentially it's just escaping the city so he can get to a rocket facility that can get into Pakistan before the leader of World Marshal tries to kill him in several hours. So yeah, just going to accept that and move on. At the end of this mission, Ryan steals Jetstream's motorcycle that he left sitting there ever since he joined Desperado. No, seriously, in Jetstream's DLC, he showed up to Denver on this same motorcycle when he originally joined the company, and it's been sitting there for this long of a time. So yeah, there's some grade A logic for you. Anyway, on his way to the facility, Ryan is stopped by Jetstream ironically so that they can have their final showdown. Never mind how Jetstream knew that he would be taking this specific row and how long he's been waiting here, maybe Blade Wolf sold him out to Jetstream since he was there first. After 30 seconds of banter, the two decide that the field next to this random row would be the perfect place for their final battle, and finally, Jetstream is the person who passes on the knowledge of proper parrying to the player in an intense display that was the greatest way to end the rivalry they were building up this whole game. With that out of the way, Ryan is able to get on the rocket ship provided by Sunny of all people and get to Pakistan to save the president, and they happen to get the correct airport where the president would be landing that wasn't broadcast to anybody just because logic. After beating his way through another brigade of Desperado troops, the ground itself literally cracks open and out comes a giant spider robot with Senator Armstrong, the leader of World Marshal, inside it, ready to have a giant monster fight. Yeah, Armstrong leaked this event's occurrence to the internet early and caused the president to turn around. So yeah, the final boss of the game came in out of literal nowhere just to overturn the plot that was built up for the last couple of hours. Sure, the robot is quickly defeated by Ryan, and then Senator Armstrong starts taking on Ryan himself because he has the strongest nanomachines ever made inside of him, hardening his body because he took all the power away from the defeated Excelsis robot. He starts talking to Ryan in between incredibly difficult punch-ups with arbitrary checkpoints about how he's using his PMC and political position to try and restore free will and choice to the individual person, and not having the people have to conform to the world order. Yeah, he actually wants all the money that comes from having a huge PMC in the middle of constant wars like in the good old JD-fueled days of MGS4. The fights are as hard as balls at that point because Armstrong can hit for 20% damage per punch and there's no healing on top of the defeated robot. And even once Ryan has switched swords in order to face the powered up Senator Armstrong, his powers are fueled by lava because why not? And his range is ridiculous up until that point where he starts throwing pieces of Excelsis at Ryan, requiring specific blade mode slashes or an instant death. Yeah, this fight is pretty frustrating. After that, Senator Armstrong is still able to pull a self-healing out of his ass in order to get a full re-heal the first time because the player doesn't know how to combat it yet, and the game's essentially over at that point since after all the attempts to get to this point in the fight, all the patterns have been figured out and the player just has to jump through hoops for about 5 minutes and finish Senator Armstrong off by literally crushing his beating heart in his fist. However, the game's not finished yet with 2 additional story DLCs available. The first one is for Jetstream Sam before he joined World Marshal, showing him attempting to invade the HQ building through waves of its military cyborgs and robots before getting up to Senator Armstrong in an attempt to shut the whole thing down. Armstrong says that his company is too big to be taken out just by his death, and more to the point, thanks to his nanomachines, not even Jetstream Sam's sword can break his defenses, even though Ryan used it to break his defenses at the end of the game. So after Jetstream loses a cutscene battle with Armstrong, ending with him being impaled by his arm spear, he then joins the company because he needed something to do with his weekend, or something like that. The second DLC is for Blade Wolf, and it shows Mistral was the handler of his training, and it was incredibly difficult since Blade Wolf takes about 15 to 20% damage from every attack, but his parrying is just as good as Ryan, so that's good news at least. After one round of training, Mistral takes him to Russia where he gets free from his leash and tries to escape to freedom through more desperado military cyborgs and robots, and at the end he encounters Thompson, his new partner supposedly, who calls Blade Wolf a pathetic fighter and a bad idea for a partner. After killing Compson, it showed that what Blade Wolf thought was a free will choice was just Mistral using him to eliminate Compson because she had an axe to grind against this character we'd never seen before, and the backstory ends with her dwarf geckos laughing at Blade Wolf. It was a good showing of character development that fleshed out his character along with Mistral for some bizarre reason since she died before this. Yeah, the entire game's story is a mishmash of half of its ideas being aspal happenstance that doesn't even try to make the least bit of sense. The DLC is trying to be timed before the game, but was produced after the game, meaning that the reasoning that it holds for secondary character fleshouts is jarring and unnecessary in some regards. Jetstream Sam's DLC is the biggest contender for complete idiocy, since it doesn't make sense at all with no explanation for the ending, just pulling plot together in the most egregious way possible. And despite Maverick and Desperado both being PMCs, the game never explains who's a client as a reason for their continued deployment all over the place, since that's how a private military corporation works apparently. So the story sucks for about half the game up until the child organ harvesting, and it ends at the Sundowner battle. How are the mechanics that we need to rely on? Well, despite this game being a part of the Metal Gear Solid family, this isn't a stealth game, obviously. At times, it tries to be a stealth game with high-power enemies on different levels to Ryan and allows him to sneak around at times, sometimes forcing him to do that with the instant kill attacks being the consequence for failure, but this game is without a doubt a hack and slash, which is a new thing for Metal Gear, which is why partway through development, Kojima needed the help of Platinum Games to actually make it happen since his team had no idea how to create a hack and slash, and with that they brought along their signature anime-style fighting systems and cutscenes that just blow the lid off of Kojima's craziness, and with their development at several points of game design, they actually beat out Kojima for a better game. Now it's time to address the elephant in the room. The one thing that pissed me off multiple times throughout this entire series of videos for this one game. You can have the elegant combat design with lists of useless combos that all just add up as multiple alleys for doing the exact same thing, but when this developer tried putting in a defense system for the player, they put it in the worst way they could have possibly done it. A specifically timed button combo was the only defense they put into this game. It doesn't work right, it's infuriating, and it does not at all mesh with the heavy attack mechanics, making only light attacks the tenable option from almost all fights. It could have easily been reassigned to a single button without too much fuss, but no, this was their best idea. I hate it. I've always hated it, and I will always hate it because it's the most annoying part of the game and it's required to beat endgame bosses as I previously stated. But despite that, the mechanics at the core having one part that doesn't work and the story being a completely disjointed mess, most of the characters being useless and one-dimensional and some boss fights relying on just being a regular enemy pumped up, this actually might be one of my favorites of the series because it's action-packed. I can actually fight things, and it's a spectacle beyond common sense while still being awesome at every turn. Great enemy fights, good arenas, and for the most part, the exact slashing combat system did add a lot to the formula for this game. Jetstream Sam turned out to be one of my favorite characters, and even though Ryan is still an unpopular character due to his lack of reality, he's at least developing somewhat throughout this part of the canon if they decide to do something with it in the future. So without further ado, here's the final scores for Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and its 2 DLC packs, who were built off of recycled assets and were mostly complete nonsense and just handed a situation in hopes that it would connect the canonical dots for the developers, since both of them were prequels to the game that were released after it, screwing up the timing and making both packs completely disconnected from the original. The next review game that I'm going to be doing is Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, so I hope to see you there when I start the series of Let's Beat videos, and as always, I'll leave you all with a final victory for gamers. Thanks for watching.